The following program is made possible by the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, CUNY.
You've just retired after 25 successful years climbing the corporate ladder. You buy a new home in a place blessed with a warmer climate, and you and your spouse are all ready to do those things you've deferred for 2 decades. And then the phone rings, and a former business associate wants you to be a director of his company. Sure, the pay is good for the hours worked, but there's all that responsibility and the risk of negative publicity if something goes wrong on your watch. Who needs it? I'm Sarah Bartlett, and this is our topic today on USA Inc. Many people spend their lives climbing to the top of corporations, but our guest today, Ray Troubh, decided to start at the top and has made a career out of serving on boards of directors, 30 to be precise. One of those companies you've probably heard a lot about lately, the Enron Corporation, where Ray is the new chairman. Ray, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a director? I mean, why? You've obviously, you must like it.
I like it very much, and despite a lot of aggravations over the years, I'd do it all over again. It's varied. There are many responsibilities, lots of opportunities to meet people, to intersect, as it were. And every corporation has different types of problems. You have to worry about the chemistry of the people you're dealing with. A lot of egotistical people you have to watch for, a lot of manipulative people on board, like life itself. So I've enjoyed it. I think my experience as a lawyer and as an investment bank has been very, very helpful. I think a lot of people are afraid to serve on boards, or when they get on boards, they kind of burrow into the ground because they're afraid of litigation, afraid of lawsuits. And my view is that if you do your job well, you're conscientious, you put in the efforts that a prudent person would do, that you probably won't, you may be sued, as many directors have and as I have, but the likelihood of being liable is, I think, quite slim.
And yet every company has to offer directors insurance in order to reassure people.
I think the only company in America, probably of any size, that doesn't offer directors and officer liability is Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire, but they're all either their family or they're fairly well heeled and they don't worry about it. But no, I think it's important to have those kinds of defenses. It gives you a comfort. But it's very limited in corporate life that directors actually have to dip into their own pockets and pay money. There have been a few isolated cases, and in my view, they've been deserved. The judgments are fair.
I just wonder how you can be held accountable if you know that the company is going to pay for your fees if you make a mistake.
Say that again?
If you're as a director and you do something wrong,
right.
Are you held accountable
well,
if you have insurance?
If you're found to have done something wrong, if you've been negligent or grossly negligent, or there are legal terms to cover it, then that's quite different. I'm talking about someone who was a competent director. You don't have to be perfect. It's, people make mistakes, but if you're a competent director, you do your homework, you participate in deliberations, you're not an absentee, you don't take consulting fees on the side and don't show up, kind of a no-show job, then I don't believe, and I think the law is the same today as it was 25 years ago. That's my view. Many lawyers don't agree with that, but I think most directors who are remaining on boards have to agree with it, otherwise they wouldn't stay there.
Have you seen the kind of disappointing behavior that you just described?
Yes, I have.
Is it common?
No, I wouldn't characterize it as common, but there are lots of directors, again, as in life, who don't work hard enough, who don't do their homework, who don't show up enough at board meetings or aren't available for the numerous telephonic and special meetings that are required. And my view, and I've said this publicly, my view is that it's the responsibility of the remaining board members to get rid of the people who don't perform.
I was just going to say, what do you do if you see one of your colleagues behaving?
You work on them. You have, now there's a new concept, so-called lead director, someone who, the cream rises to the top, so that there's one director, one person in the group whom other people trust, who respect, who works harder, who has the ear of the chief executive or the other board members, and he or she can talk to this offending director and say, look, work harder, show up more, earn your pay, and if not, we're going to, either you resign or we're not going to nominate you for re-election. I think that's an important...
Does that actually happen?
That happens. Not enough, because there's still, in many public companies, there are board people who don't pull their weight. And in effect, we all get the same pay, each director, so that the people who don't work hard enough are really overpaid, and the people who do work hard are underpaid, and we've got to reverse that situation. It's happening. I think now there's the new phenomenon that is a result of sort of a combination of Sarbanes-Oxley and the New York Stock Exchange regulations, which I shouldn't say, but I'm going to say we're 10 years too late. I think the Stock Exchange is taking credit for things that many other boards did a long time ago. But in any event, it's done. So the result of that is there's a so-called nominating committee composed only of independent directors. And if you really define independent as those who are not cronies of the chief executive, who don't play golf with them, don't go to the same church or synagogue, then they're really independent. They are going to bring on to public board, I'm talking about the great bulk of listed companies, really independent people who are not beholden to the chief executive, who are going to speak their mind and do a conscientious job. And I think that's what's happening, and I think that's all to the betterment of corporations and shareholders and capitalism generally.
One of the things that's come in for so much criticism is the way that CEOs have been paid in recent years, and who is responsible for that if not directors?
We directors, and I indict myself as well as many of my colleagues. We sort of went along. We hired the consultants to give us comfort and let us know that is what their peers are getting, and everyone had to be in the 75% or better bracket. So every year was just catching up with somebody else. So it went overboard. There were too many increases, huge bonuses. I guess the stock options were too high, too high a level. But on the other hand, I think the headlines a little bit misleading when they say somebody got $50 million this year. That's a result of cashing in 10 years of options. So at least to me, you divide that by 10 at least. Not that in some cases wasn't egregious, but on the other hand, someone didn't get that kind of money in 1 year. But I think what's happening now is the spotlight is on directors, on boards, on compensation practices, which should be criticized, so that the rate, I'm not saying chief executives aren't going to get increases in compensation, but the rate of acceleration is going to be reduced significantly, if not flattened out. So you're going to have a better situation as we go on.
That's encouraging.
That's my...
to protect yourself as a director, presumably you have to feel that you have the right information about the company. How hard is it to get good information? Do you have your own sources? Do you have to be a reporter?
Well, I think that varies. I don't think there's one cookie-cutter answer to that. It varies with the personality of the chief executive on the one hand, his dominance of the corporation, particularly his dominance of his subsidiaries, his subordinates, excuse me. If you're the general counsel or you're the chief financial officer, your bonus is in effect beholden on what the chief executive says about you. So you have to be very careful about the loyalties going only in one direction. But having said that, I don't think it's difficult at all to get the information. I think if you don't feel you're getting it from the chief executive, then you talk directly with those senior officers. You demand it, and it comes. I mean, unless there's absolute fraud pervading the entire organization, which is very limited, right? Despite the headlines, that doesn't really happen. You get the information you need. It's a question of what you do with it. And then if you decide something is wrong or it's inadequate, you talk to your other directors and privately, and things get done. I think the headlines that you see about the inadequacy of the information or the fact that the agenda is out of your control is just doesn't happen. You want something in the agenda, you put it on.
So you can just pick up the phone, you can call someone if you feel like you need more.
Absolutely right.
Have you ever been called by employees?
Yes, I have. People are not whistleblowers in the sense you read about it now, but someone complaining about inactivity or bad judgment. And so,
what do you do about that when you get a call like that?
What I do immediately is talk to another director. I think it's very important not to work unilaterally. I don't want to be kind of an industrial spy. So you talk to someone else on the board whose judgment you trust, who you think is prudent, intelligent, and good judgment. Most important thing is judgment. So you don't run off the deep end, and you investigate it. You decide who to talk with, and most frequently, if I decide things are really bad, I will talk to the outside law firm for the guy. Don't go to the inside general counsel because he or she may be contaminated, may have a problem with the chief executive. So you would go out to I won't go on a board unless there is a really first-class outside law firm available. And so I will talk to a senior partner of that firm or the partner who's in charge of the work and discuss it with them off the record, and things happen.
Are there things that should be done to encourage more whistleblowers in this climate?
Yes, as long as people who are on the receiving end of the information don't go off half-cocked. I mean, you've got to make a judgment as to whether this is really a disgruntled employee, of which there are many. Mm-hmm. We've all been in that situation, and decide whether, in fact, there is some validity to the complaint. If you decide there is, and you confer with a colleague. Generally, you would talk to, I think the chairman of the audit committee is an extremely important role. And you talk to him or to her off the record, and then you sort of move.
Move from there.
Yeah, move from there.
We'll be right back.
The Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College of the City University of New York is the largest and most diverse accredited business school in the United States, offering high-quality, full-time, and part-time degree programs at the undergraduate, master's, and PhD levels. For information about the Zicklin School of Business, please visit our website, zicklin.baruch.cuny.edu. That's zicklin.baruch.cuny.edu.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Ray Troubh, the new chairman of the Enron Corporation. Speaking of Enron, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be on that board?
Well, I think as I said earlier, I've had a legal and an investment banking background, and when the Enron situation began to slip and the board recognized it, they decided they needed some outside people to do a study of some of the so-called related party deals. And they appointed two outsiders. One was Bill Powers, who was the then dean of the University of Texas Law School, and me, and one other inside director. And we became a committee, hired outside professionals, accountants, and lawyers, and then did a study of a deal. The board had prescribed what the investigation should consist of. We weren't a governmental agency had no subpoena powers, so we were relatively limited, but we did a fairly thorough study in a very short time as to what had been going on. produced the so-called Powers Report. Sorry.
I have to admit that if I got a call inviting me to be on the Enron board, I'm not sure I would leap to that decision. Was it hard for you to decide, and what were the thoughts that went through your head?
I thought about it very carefully. I didn't have a lot of time, and I consulted with some of my colleagues whose judgments I respect, the bulk of whom told me not to do this. So
what made you decide
given
to?
my personality, I went the other way. I decided that I personally had done nothing wrong. If anything had been done wrong, I wasn't sure what had gone on. B, my experiences would have been very helpful. You know, being a director is a very portable kind of experience. What I learn in Company A, I can transfer to B and C and so on. I thought it'd be a good new education for me, but primarily I thought it was a chance, as they say, to give something back. I felt that if you could help save jobs, return maybe to the core businesses, that you were doing, in effect, God's work. So I decided to do it.
Any regrets?
None whatsoever. I'm delighted that I was able to do it, stay on, and help them now going through a difficult period, but emerging under the leadership of the fellow who's really running the company day to day, Steve Cooper. An exceptional job is being done. I don't take credit for it. I'm saying other people have done it, but given the enormity of the situation, what's being done is it's being very well handled.
As the chairman of Enron, what kinds of issues have you had to focus on? Have you made some changes on the board?
Well, yeah, the original board resigned seriatim, as it were, and I remained because I'd had no prior affiliation, in effect, with the company. And we selected in conjunction with the creditors. The creditors, in effect, control the company. Now, the stockholders' equity, unfortunately, is gone. We've announced that. So the creditors and Cooper and I, in effect, got together and we interviewed maybe 50 people. We wanted a diversity of experience, no affiliations with the past. And we have the board is only 4 people, myself and 3 others. They're very well dispersed geographically in terms of their experiences, and we get along extremely well. Each brings a certain special experience to the situation. And
You mentioned diversity. I just wonder how important you think that is in general for boards. Has that been something that's gotten us into trouble?
When I say diversity, I meant diversity of experience. I wasn't speaking in gender or other terms.
No, I think it's a broad term and it can mean many things.
Yes,
and
it can.
That's really what I'm driving at.
I think it's important to have people who have done things that you haven't done. Maybe been a chief executive, or maybe been a teacher, or maybe been in the government. I mean, in all aspects of life impinge on this. And so we have a former submarine commander, so naval experience, been a commander.
That's unusual.
Pardon?
That's unusual.
That's very unusual, but who also ran a public utility company. And we have someone who's been a banker and who has expertise in the bankruptcy laws, and a third person, someone who had a major role in the energy business. So combined, I think we get along very well. We have very few disagreements, and I think it's been quite effective. We work with a very able, powerful, hardworking chief executive. So.
Without naming any names, what can you tell us is the most difficult situation you've ever found yourself in as a director?
I think deciding that the chief executive is inadequate for the role, that either he or she is slipping, or the job is getting bigger, or the competition's more difficult, and it's deciding that A, someone had to go, B, deciding how to tell him or her, very importantly, what should be the compensation for leaving somebody of a job. I'm not talking about someone who is fraudulent. I'm talking about just inadequacy of ability. So I think that's very tough, and particularly because if you've been on a board for a number of years, you develop a camaraderie with people. There's a chemistry. You know who their families are. You know what kinds of problems they have personally, and everyone has family problems of one sort or another. So it's tough to go and say your time is up.
How hard is it? I mean, you're a fiduciary. You have a fiduciary duty to shareholders, and in a situation like that, you have a personal relationship. How does one decide when to go ahead and sacrifice that relationship and do it in the name of the shareholders?
Well, I think the overriding responsibility is fiduciary, I believe. I'm there as the designee of the shareholders. Although I vote my own conscience, I know who put me there. And I decided long ago that either you're going to be a director or you're going to be a friend. In fact, I had one situation, I was on the board of a company and things were not going the way I thought they should be going. I didn't think people were working hard enough. And I said to the chief executive, either I'm going to be your director or I'm going to be your friend. And I decided to be his friend and leave the board. We're great friends, and the company is flourishing now. But I decided it wasn't at the time I did it.
There are some people who have said that with the new Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the listing standards that we've put so much of a burden on boards of directors. There's so many things that they have to be concerned about, and almost a checklist has developed that people are going through the motions to comply with technical considerations. Do you think that's an issue?
Well, I think it's an issue. I frankly think that the headhunters are making more of it than it is, because I'm on the receiving end of dozens and dozens of calls and letters from people who want to be on boards of directors, knowing what's happening, reading the headlines, and knowing they perceive to be increased responsibilities, if not increased liabilities. But I think there are lots and lots of able people who are available. There's a universe out there, the ex-accountants, for example, retired accountants, lawyers, chief executives, engineers, teachers. So while they go through a checklist, they may think a little more deeply, longer about going on boards. There is not a shortage of able people to direct American corporations.
But once they're on the board, do they have to spend so much time worrying about meeting the letter of the law that they don't really have time to look at the big picture? They might miss something big because they're so focused on dotting all the I's and crossing the T's.
Yeah, I think there are people like that. They're not the best directors. I think that if you're going to worry about your own hip pocket or your own balance sheet, then you're not an effective director. I think you've got to go out there and say, this is a job of mine, that life is not that unfair, that if I do my job, I'm going to come through okay. I may be great at C or D or A, but I'm not going to go to jail, prison, or I'm not going to be fined. So, yeah, there are people like that. I don't happen to think they're the best directors, and when I interview people for directorships, I try to press them and say, you're going to sit there all day and worry about you're going to become burrowed in, or you're going to do a job. So
you mentioned that one thing when you're considering a board is to look and see who the outside law firm is, which would never have occurred to me. What other things do you look at in order to decide whether this is for you? Well,
originally, when I first started in business, the so-called accounting firm, there was the Big 12, and then there became the Big 10 and the Big 8. Now it's the Big 4. And I feel very strongly that you need to have one of the major league accounting firms that may be just beyond the Big 4. But you need someone who have experience with SEC filings, with state laws, with foreign laws. So there's so much to do. You need some firm that has a great deal of experience. So I insist on a major league law firm and a major league accounting firm. It's extremely important to me who the other directors are. I don't want to be the only experienced director on a board. I frankly think, and this is a gratuitous statement, you didn't ask me, but I think a lot of the problems of the headline-provoking scandals now, or the scandal-provoking headlines, are where you had great companies growing up in small towns, and you had cronies of the chief executive sort of coming and poker playing cronies, the guys and women who drank coffee with them, and they didn't know what it is to be a director. They didn't understand stock exchange regulations. They'd never seen an SEC report. So I think things get out of hand. I don't believe they're all bad people ab initio. I think that things got out of control, and then they panicked. I think they said things. should have done. So I think you need experienced people. In fact, I believe there should be a professional class of directors. I count myself a professional.
I would think so, with 30 young.
Yeah, it's not a pejorative term in my view. I think there ought to be a lot of us around. I'm not looking for jobs. I'm sort of too old to go on new boards now. But they should, and there are a lot of good people, men and women, who serve as chairs of accounting, of audit committees and comp committees of large companies who can go from place to place. And that every board, let's say, middle class and larger class corporation need that type of person on board, several of them.
Ray, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, enjoyed it.
We've been very fortunate to have Ray Troubh, Enron's chairman, with us. We'll be right back.
Some people think of New York as the world's second home. The City University of New York, with students coming from 90 countries and speaking more than 155 languages, is the world's first university. Find us on the web at cuny.edu or call us at 1-800-CUNY-YES.
The good news is directors are now under pressure to pay more attention. The bad news? That same pressure can discourage good people from wanting to become involved. Yet now, more than ever, corporate America needs to be able to draw on a vast pool of talented candidates for directors. As a result of new regulations, standards have been raised. Directors with close ties to the companies they oversee are no longer welcome. A majority has to be truly independent. And directors who join audit committees are now required to have a level of financial expertise that many who previously served in that capacity do not have. There's also a recognition that homogeneity is a bad thing. Too many directors have been cast from the same mold. A board that can draw on a wider range of expertise and life experience will probably find it easier to raise an awkward question or spot something out of the ordinary. Yet, if anything, the pool of candidates is shrinking, as many say they don't want to be in the spotlight, don't want the heightened responsibilities. This is too bad. Fixing the system requires that capable, honest business people of all stripes step up to the plate. For USA Inc., I'm Sarah Bartlett.